You're in a different part of your house.
Yeah, I'm in the basement, my parents' basement.
Aren't you
Yes.
normally there?
No, I'm in my dad. My dad has a little side room, and I go in there normally. Yeah,
Because he's in Connecticut and he's got
yeah. You're back.
big space. I am. Thank God.
And
I had a good
so
time, but happy to be back.
How
Happy to
did
be
it
back.
go off?
Honestly, pretty well. Wait, I'm trying to get our levels again. See. Do I need to go lower?
No, you're fine.
Yeah, no. So it went well. It went well. Seems to be selling well. Audiences are very good. Two things I just want to say about it. One is that I could only work on that play for so long. Like it's like not a because you to sit there and even just watch the run and like focus and take notes separate from even working it for it was a lot of work. It was like kind of like fucking with my mind a little bit, like that, and it plays dark. The other thing though that was fascinating is that I learned is that it's funny. And I was talking to Michael about it because he came to see it.
Right.
It's not the kind of play that you should expect a catharsis from per se. And what I mean by that is it's sort of like a cerebral play. It's very psychological in a lot of ways. And I say that because I was really fighting in our production for, as much of an emotional impact as possible. And I do think that it has a naturally more removed quality to it, if that makes sense.
Well, it's all fucking academics.
It is. But you know what's funny? Yes. But that's exactly kind of what I was low-key trying to avoid. And what I mean by that is I wasn't really interested in intellectual exercise.
Yeah.
I was interested.
I've never read the play. Is it all kind of like an intellectual thing?
Not at all. It's no.
It doesn't seem that way.
It's not at all. It's not at all. It's not at all. But the language is quite dense, and a lot of even in the art, especially George, who really is the engine of the play, and I learned that about doing the play too. George, who we're talking about Virginia Woolf. George, who's the engine of the play, is so. I think he's sociopathic, and he plays psychological games, and so it's so.
And what happened? Their kid died. What was it again?
Well. I mean, yeah, no. What it is that they don't have a kid. They made up the kid.
Oh, right.
So exactly. So the relationship of these two highly intellectual people, you know, there's so much and for me, the play in a lot of ways is about unfulfilled promises. And they were unable to have children the same way that Nick and Honey, their guests, were unable to have children. And over the years, the play takes place on the eve of their son's quote unquote, their son's 21st birthday. So one could assume that they've built this child 2 decades ago as a way to make up for the fact that they weren't able to have kids. And they lived with this illusion, because the play explores illusion versus reality in a big, big way. There's this great line in the play where Martha, she's trying to reason with George in the third act, and she goes, you don't know the difference between illusion and reality, George. And he says, no, but we must act as though we did. And she says, amen. It's an interesting conceit. Anyway, so he...
But so the turn, but like, do they believe that the kid actually exists, or is it kind of just like a game they play, or they've actually like deluded
all
themselves?
of the above. All of the above. It's such a deep-rooted emotional game that they've almost come to use as a survival mechanism for the two of themselves. And then in the third act, the final game, because they never talk about this child.
Right, is he kills the kid, right? He kills the kid.
He kills the kid. And it's crazy and it's fucked, but it's the only way they can get back to zero to start to build a relationship again.
Yeah, that's fucked. That's a little interesting.
It's a great play.
I'm doing this play now. Like, I know this sounds like lame, but like everybody who comes sees it, which I think is kind of a bad sign. I don't fucking know, but everybody I know who's come and see it is literally like, wow, like that's a lot for you. And I'm like, and I just forget that, like, because um it's a very it's a very volatile track, and it's just a lot. It's just a crazy ass play, and like,
They're saying specifically it's a lot for you.
yes, I've had a few people come up to me and be like, wow, like that was a lot, like, and so, which I don't know if that's a good thing for people to say after a show. Like, I'm like, okay, like, it's just like, wow, you're really working up there. I'm like,
Yeah, that phrase. Well, you did that. You wore those costumes.
Yeah, it's like you're really working up there. That's like, anyway, but like,
but that's not true. That's.
But it's like, I'm like, oh my god, like I'm just like, I didn't realize until the other day, like after the show, like I am spent, dude. Like I am fucking exhausted. I'm just like dead. It's like, and it's just crazy that like, oh yeah, like I just forget that like when you do theater, like if you have like a real fucking like intense show you're doing like 8 times a week, like you're basically in a high stress environment for like 2 hours, like 8 times a week, like
putting your body through that.
Yeah, it's just weird. But,
I know exactly what you mean. I know.
so
I do know what you mean.
The world. Anyway,
we're saving the world.
We're saving the world.
I was talking to somebody this weekend when I was in Connecticut, actually, and they were asking like, so like, what do you make like on average? When you're doing a show out of town. And I said, well, it runs the gamut. I said,
I know who this was too. I could guess who it was.
I said, if you're lucky, you're making if you're lucky out of town, you're making $1,000 a week on a theater gig. And they were like, what? They like couldn't believe it. They were like, you're kidding. What do you make on the low end? I was like, well, let's not go there then.
Yeah, sure.
Isn't that crazy? Yeah, I know. I was shocked.
Anyway.
Hey, hello, friends and family. Welcome to Creative Risk, where we talk about art, entrepreneurialism, how little we get paid, and everything in between.
And it really shouldn't be. You know what I hate? It's so fucking lame. Like, just like a general theater that's like, wow, like we don't make enough. And it's like, okay, like it's always something theater people say. It's like, wow, like we don't get paid nearly enough. And it's like, but like, okay, what are your suggested fixes? It's like, but just like a general complaint everybody has. I'm not trying to, but like people are earnest, like, wow, like, well, it's just crazy that we don't get paid, or like this is what, like, like that much. And it's like, yeah, what are this is theater, baby. It's like,
right. I know.
That's like going to like, that's like doing Doctors Without Borders and going to fucking like, some crumbling like, building in Gaza and being like, we don't get paid enough for this. It's like
well, yeah, exactly. No, it's a very fair point.
It's like when people say that, I'm like, yeah, that's what the fuck it is.
And exactly.
Art, entrepreneurialism, and everything. Entrepreneurialism. You make no money, bitch. That's how it is.
I know. Like, I do know what you mean. Well, it's I was thinking about how we should, we talked about it actually in the very first episode, but I think I want to come back to an episode all about your why, because to your point, it truly is a bit of a labor of love, and that just has to be okay. We just have to be okay with that.
Yeah, if you're doing theater, like you're just not like, that's just like, you're not doing it for the money, bro.
But and that's just, I just have to say, like it is something that I love. So on today's episode, we are talking about working with quote unquote bad creative collaborators. I do say quote unquote because obviously that can mean so many different things, and I don't want to be like, oh, what's bad. We're going to talk about what we think makes a quote unquote bad collaborator. And if you need to read LABOD's bio, you can find that somewhere online, and then you'll read all about it.
Christ.
No. No, but we'll talk about it. But in a basic, and listen, let's talk about why this is just so important. Because what we were just saying, we were just talking about how this is a labor of love. So whether that is you actually being on a gig that you've gotten yourself, whether it's something you are self-producing. Who has the time or the room for working with bad collaborators? There's so few dollars, so few resources in all of this work as is, that when you add in the component of working with artists who um um for lack of a better word, or less than, and I don't just mean talent wise, I just mean in all the senses, to whose benefit is it? Do you know what I'm saying, mama?
Yes, Mama Kiki. Yes, yes.
But it
Yes.
really
What is
is like
that? What is that, Mama? What's that meme you were talking about? What is it?
oh no, mama kudos for wait, what is it?
Mama kudos for spilling.
No, mama kudos for saying that, for spilling. That's right. It's so funny to me.
Yeah.
No, but
No,
but
yeah. Well, look, I think that it's hard, right? Because like, yeah, it's we need collab. Well, I don't know if we need. Maybe this is something we talk about. It's like, well, you take for grant. I take for granted, like, yeah, like working artistically with people is like, it's just like a big commitment, and like
intimate
and it's very
relationship.
intimate, and this is
Yeah,
something that you
agreed.
always like whenever you
Agreed.
creatively collaborate on something with somebody, you always create like an aura of like, it's not like it's like there's like it's not like pretentious or like overly precious, but like you're clear that it's like, you bring, you're like, this is, I know I'm stepping into something real. I'm stepping into like a real, like, intimate, like, this is something like we are going to be embarking together, no matter
And what's
what
the
stage
opposite
it's
of
at.
that for you?
Casual, just entering a creative collaboration a little more casual, which is what I feel like I do, which I don't think actually serves me, because I feel like, not that it's like work with few people, which, look, by the way, I don't think necessarily that's a terrible conceit, which we can talk about another
Sure.
time, but like, you know it's just like, yeah, let's fucking work on something, yeah, let's talk about this, let's like get this, it's just, and look, there's benefit to keeping it casual and like working kind of loosely with a bunch of people on a bunch of different things. I think there is true benefit to that, because it is kind of like throwing paint against a wall and you kind of see what sticks. But if that's too much of what you're doing, if too much of it feels casual, and if too much of it, and we'll talk about this, doesn't feel like it is kind of like that deep, like we are really working towards a shared thing, and we are really trying to, we're taking this very seriously, and we believe in this project together, and we are carrying this. If it doesn't, if you don't have any collaborations like that, it's, you learn by doing and you learn by experiencing. And so we'll talk about this, but that's something, it's really, really important. It's something that I take for granted. Like, oh, like, it's not just any old person will do. Or like, yeah, like, let's
Right.
fucking work on this and this and that. It's like, no, like when
Right.
you choose to work with people, like,
Well, and I'm
there
not
should
gonna.
be
It's
thought and
funny. I'm not gonna.
consideration.
I won't say who it is.
I
Um.
can bleep it out, whatever.
Will you really bleep it out?
Yes, I always bleep it out. Okay.
Um.
Yes, that's an interesting. We'll talk about this relationship, because I think that's
Yes, well, because
interesting.
sometimes, just to your point, sometimes, and I am picky. I am picky about who I'm going to collaborate with for a lot of these reasons, for time, resources, all these things. And there's this person that is seemingly super on top of their stuff. Interesting.
What?
LOL.
What?
Well, I just wanted to go in for this part of I remember he never wrote back to me, and then I remember that email I
Right.
sent, and then
Right.
and so I just wrote to him today, that I wanted to come in for it, and he goes, "Hey Josh, happy to have you tape. We'll send over." It's just funny because it's like all the same. It's just the game. I knew that was going to work
So why do you think this casting guy got back to you this time as opposed to other times?
because remember when I emailed him after I saw the show with the director and the writers on the same email as though I
Right,
was
right, right,
congratulating the
right,
full
right,
team. I
right, right.
responded back to that thread about the show too because they were doing it.
Ah,
It's just
yep.
I just you can feel when things shift a bit. Anyway,
Right.
what were we talking about before my camera
I
shifted
have
gears again?
no fucking idea. Oh, no, we were
Okay,
talking
well
about. Oh, we
let's.
were talking about
Oh yes, 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 yes,
the
yes, yes,
that
yes, yes,
bad
yes, yes, yes,
collaborator.
yes,
Yes.
yes. So anyway, you just never really know until you got. So it's just like trial and error, like everything else. Is going to take some failures. That was a huge failure, but I didn't even realize it until some months in, and I've subsequently said many times to him, like I think they're fake, and I just what I mean by that is just it's shiny on the outside, but inside there's nothing going on, and I don't even just
Yes,
mean talent
basically
wise.
just because you're being a little cryptic. So basically, you're saying that this person talked a big game, seemed like they were going to be a great person to collaborate with on a certain project, and then turned out to basically what? Like they wouldn't follow through. They would like what was, and maybe this will answer sort of the first question, is what makes a bad collaborator. But I'm curious to hear about this person. Why was this person fake to you? What made this
Well,
person fake?
it's actually kind of like what you're saying. I mean, this. Listen. I've got lots of issues I'm constantly reflecting on my own struggles as a collaborator and ways to improve. In no way am I, top tier here. I'm constantly learning, and so I want to give everybody a little bit of grace. But it ended up being a waste of time because it felt like kind of what you were saying in the beginning, like it was a lot of talking, but then there wouldn't actually be a ton of follow through. It kind of felt like we were biding time until something else came along, and so was getting frustrated in terms of putting my own time and resources in. But let's get into this. Let's get into this about what makes a bad collaborator. What makes a bad creative collaborator? Um, I would argue, in a very basic sense. And by the way, because bad can not necessarily mean like they're bad people or even bad artists. It can mean a lot of different things. But I would argue that a bad collaborator, one of the things is that the two collaborators are at different talent levels, which could also, by the way, mean not just creatively, because like I'm a great creative artist, but I also have other skill sets. And sometimes when I work with artists who might be great creatives but don't have executive functioning skills, don't have the ability to follow through with their, like, that makes it, we are on a not equal playing field, which, even though we could play to our own strengths, which is it becomes more work, slash it makes it
Well,
it
because I
it
think that's important. I think it's important that if you work with look, because yeah, I don't hear you saying this, but like sometimes it's good if like collaborators like you complement each other's weaknesses. But certain let's say one thing brass tacks right now. I think that if any artists are listening to this who are and but not that producers aren't artists or whatever, just straight up producers, but like if you're somebody who's like, no, I'm like a creative, like generative, like I'm an actor or a filmmaker or a fucking writer or whatever, like one thing I hear you, let's there can't one person can be the brains and the other person can be the art. Like that's fucking dangerous.
exactly
Like that's
exactly
that's fucking fucked up when it's like, yeah, well, I'm more of like a creative type and like I have really
right
good creative ideas, but like
right
I'm not good at sort of all of like the
Well,
executive
you and
like
I were you or I and I were in this position not too long ago. And to be clear, we also have to say, we're talking bad collaborators in a general sense. I do think that part of what you and I will are the lens that we are kind of looking at this through is through self-producing, which of course is different than a bad collaborator, like literally
right.
in the space.
Right. I think we're
But
literally talking about collaborating on like mounting a project. That's how I think
Yeah,
that we're
yeah.
we're,
No, I
we're
think, and I think that's, and I, because I still think a lot of what we're going to talk about pertains to just being in the space with people. But Labod and I were on a project not too long ago, and we were being very deferential to the creatives, even though we were all creatives, because we had more processes. It became more about in some ways, and you were having to sort of talk me down a little bit because I was like, "What the fuck's going on? What's happening? Why are we preserving and you want to know what in fact I want to say this for myself. Part of what's frustrating about that is as though your own creative juices and abilities aren't as important as the other people, rather than, and that is incredibly frustrating. But I just want to sit. Oh, go
Yeah.
ahead.
No, and look, and there's some people out there are pure producers, and it's like that's what they're there to do. Like, and like they may have macro creative thoughts or whatever, but they're really there to see the pro. And by the way, that's great. That's phenomenal. And trust me, people like that are great to have in this business. But if you're like but this always happens with almost every single creative collaboration you hear about with anybody. Is there's always going to be one person almost 95% of the time who's going to be carrying the weight of actually getting the project done. And a common excuse that you hear is from the other person is like, "Oh, I just don't have that skill set." Or I don't have
Right.
that
Exactly.
interest. Like sometimes they'll even say interest, but like, that skill set. And the only thing I'll
Exactly.
say about the unequal talent levels is two things. Number one, when it comes to we're talking about like producerial skill sets, like, look, as long as somebody's willing to learn and put in the work, like
Yes.
that's great. And
Yes.
look, I do
I
think that
agree.
whenever you enter any project, I think a safe assumption is that you should always assume that you're going to have to be the one to carry it forward. I don't care how
Sure.
reliable your collaborators are.
Sure.
I think that's always a safe assumption to make. But the other thing I'll say about talent, artistic talent, is yeah, like working with somebody you know, who is going to hurt the quality of the piece because you feel like they're owed some a lot of times because of obligation, because maybe they had a hand in whatever. It's like, that doesn't help anybody.
Of
It doesn't
course.
help anybody to have mediocre talent there, but yes.
Well, I also but I also want to take responsibility for myself in some of these scenarios, and in so much as, and I think because I think it's also a bad collaborator could come out of a bad process. And what do I mean by that? If it's not clear on who's going to do what, and that I actually do like delegating roles, because I think if it's always all hands on deck, it gets confusing as to who's doing what. So I do think it's important that people are clear as to what people's roles and responsibilities ultimately should be, because then sometimes it just feels like we're all responsible for everything,
Right.
and then those unclear responsibilities make bad collaborators. Does that make sense?
Yes, and one thing I say, don't we're having a loose conversation, but like, look, I think what's also a bad collaborator is somebody who comes in, is that sort of type A person who comes in and says, "Here's how we're going to do it. Here's how I like
Yes.
to work."
Yes. I agree.
It's
I
like,
totally agree with that.
which I've been certainly guilty of, is entering like, this is the process I like to use to work through these things. And
Right.
sort of, so if you're gonna be the one to step in and impose that onto people, then you need to accept the consequences of,
Totally
okay, well,
agree.
that's not how everybody works. And so like, or maybe you should
Totally
have found,
agree.
maybe I should have found something that worked for all of us and not just something that
Probably
I understood.
probably the biggest I mean, I really mean this. I think this is I'm constantly talking about for myself, constantly finding ways to improve my own communication and managing of expectations. And communication and follow through, someone with poor communication and follow through will absolutely, it will be a bad collaborator. It will not work if the person does not communicate, if they do not follow through, which is kind of, it could be symptomatic of the other things we were just talking about, it will be a bad collaboration. You know this about me in particular, but a collaborator, in my opinion, who creates a negative workspace,
But what
whether
does
that's
poor
because
communication
they
look like?
are
I'm
just,
sorry. I know you're trying to blow through these things, but
oh,
what does poor communication look like?
yeah,
Because this is a
yeah.
word that this I have to say that this is a word that is tossed around a lot more and more. I hear it's like we're talking about communication, communication. Well, what is good communication? What is bad communication? What is, and you're somebody who's always had a very strong opinions about what that looks like. And so what does that look like to you?
Well, okay, I'll literally take today actually as an example of my poor communication, and I try to take responsibility for it. There's a director with whom I've been working on this project for some months, and right before I left to do Virginia Woolf, we were working on a piece of it. We were working on the play, and we were going to talk. We were going to connect before I left, but we didn't end up connecting. And this person reached out to me a couple of times over the course of the process when I was in rehearsals, and I didn't even respond. I didn't even
Yeah,
respond. And
that's a good
and
example.
and in a very basic sense, and I said this to them today, I said, there's really no excuse, because while I didn't need to give a whole essay, I could have said, hey, up to my head in rehearsals, no, need to connect. Let's touch base when I'm home. Hope you're well. I mean, that's all it needed to be.
That's a good, well, let me tell you something. That I think is a very good baseline because, I have to look at, because here's the thing, right? It's like, diagnosing the symptom as opposed to like the cause or whatever. Like, because look, I don't think being a good communicator means constantly being in communication with people
No,
or
no.
constantly like answering everything in a, like, ugh, God, I'm dealing with this, I was dealing with this fucking person. uh, I'll bleep this out, but like, this is a good example. It was kind of a red flag for me. Is like, this did I tell you about this?
No, you didn't tell me about this. Who
Well, I
is
got
this?
asked to do a production of that by somebody who runs a theater company that I really respect.
Oh,
And
the one I know.
no, different
Oh,
company that's similar to
okay,
that.
okay.
And but like, I would take this guy was trying to make the rehearsal schedule like 2 months in advance for by the way, a non-paying project. And I was pretty good about
Non-paying.
communicating. Yes, it was going to be a share of revenue and box office. And the reason why I was open to doing is because I really respect this company and I respect what this guy's doing, and like I respected the people involved. So I was like, fuck it. Like, I don't have anything, I've booked something since then that I wouldn't be able to do it. But like, this guy was whatever.
Sure,
And
sure.
I would take about 3 days to respond to this guy. And he was making me feel like shit. Like shit. Like he was making me feel like I was a fucking like unprofessional like freak. And because like he would be barraging me with text, and then I'd say something different in the email back to him, and he's like, "But you said this in the text," and it was just like it was chaotic, and I don't think it was a bad communication on my end, if I may, because it's like so when I say like when we talk about communication, like as opposed to looking at the what it looks like, I think what you just said is a good example of its causation. If you feel like you're avoiding talking to somebody, that to me is bad communication, because because we all know what that's like. We don't get back to people because we don't want to deal with it.
Sure,
That
of
to me is
course.
that's bad communication right there. If
Sure,
you're not getting
sure.
back to somebody because or like, I have two projects in limbo right now that we haven't talked about with these people for a long time, for months and months and months. And, I'm avoiding sort of circling back, sort of finding closure with those things. I'm avoiding it. That's bad communication. And it's like it's good to, as opposed to looking at like, oh, what does it look like this, like what is the symptoms of it? I think it's good to go, if you are avoiding people, talking to people because you don't want to deal with it, that's how you can pretty much tell you're not communicating well.
Yeah,
And
I think it's yeah. Go ahead.
and in terms of witnessing, so that's how I know I'm doing it badly. But how do you know when somebody to you is not communicating well to you? I guess, what does that look like? I guess it looks like, you know, if if you follow up with somebody a couple times on something, and by the way, I think in a, I'm not saying like 3 times a week on one thing, like that's too much. But like, if you're like a sane person who's like, oh, like maybe I follow up, I send somebody an email, then maybe a month later I follow up on something, or a couple weeks later, whatever, and they are really not getting back to you, or have committed to do something for you or to do something for the project, and then they are not, and then they sort of ghost you and do not answer, like, for a while on that thing. That's probably what bad communication looks like. And if you're on the receiving end of bad communication, would you say that's accurate?
I would. I mean, I just wrote down. I think we should do. I mean, I find this topic to be interesting and like something that I try to learn more about and study in myself, because I also think there's like crazy expectations in 2024 from a communication standpoint. Between texts and phone calls and emails and all of the social media platforms. And hey, I DM'd you and didn't you? It's like what? Like if I spent my
Exactly. Oh
life,
my
if
God.
if I spent my life glommed to all my devices and every single platform I'm on, I wouldn't. I mean, I mean, I've got hundreds of unread text messages. I have my
Oh
own
yeah, me
preferred
too.
communication patterns. But if I may, this is where I try to be a good collaborator. I try to communicate how I effectively work. I say text messages are not a great form of communication for me. Email is much better for me, actually, because
Right.
I don't like worry. So anyway, poor communication is an example of bad collaborator. Well, and I do think I want to do a whole episode on communication, because I think this is important for actors, actually. It's partially not just for these collaborators, but with your reps. And also, I think communication with yourself, interestingly enough, but we can come back to that. So okay, a bad collaborator, this about me, is someone who brings negativity in the workspace. I'm super sensitive to this in particular. And so in my opinion, the creative process is a bit of a Fabergé egg. I don't mean the process of making decisions and making choices, but being in a space where you feel comfortable to do so. I'm not going to, won't share what you shared with me some months ago, but you were in a situation where you were in, you're a big, bold performer. You were making some choices and it kind of upset somebody. And I would argue that, I mean, you seemed okay with it, but I would argue that there might have been a better way for that person to communicate their concerns, because it shut down your creative process a bit, where maybe you felt like you had to walk on eggshells, if that makes sense.
Right. And it was something that actually really had nothing. It was, yeah, that, no, I'm glad. Well, the reason why a negative work and what creating a negative workspace looks like to me. And look, I am just as fucking guilty as this. This is hard. When you have big, bold opinions, which I think a lot of
Yeah.
artists do, it's
Yeah.
hard to be a good collaborator. It's hard to not shut down things, frankly.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
hard, like, because one thing I can't stand, I don't think this person is someone I love, who's like a really dear friend of mine, who's a great actor, and I've worked on this process, so I've gotten to know really well. Um, and works all the time, and is but like, there's a scene where I have a gun, okay, in the play, and I threw the gun to somebody. I was like, I just threw it to them, and this person, wasn't this somebody from the outside? He's watching the scene. He's like, you would never throw a gun. Like, that's not what you do with, like, that's not like, oh, the gun's not in debt. Like, I can't stand like these fake rules we make. Like, oh, you never do that with the gun. So I literally, I like snapped them. I said, oh, so in the history of the world, nobody's ever thrown a gun to somebody. That's never happened.
Right. Right.
And
Right.
it's like, I
Right.
say this
Right. Right.
because, and that kind of shut him down, and he apologized to me. But like, I say this because when you are being put down, or your ideas are not given a chance to breathe or being fleshed out, that is a sign of a bad collaborator. And let me say this, I am guilty of being that guy. and not in the space acting, but when I'm collaborating with people, if somebody
Right.
says an idea for something and I don't like it, I pretty much let that be known immediately. It's a bad habit of mine. I have a bad habit of not being able to play it to like, yeah, well, let's parse that out. Like, let's see what's there. Let's like dig in the mud with that idea a bit. Like, if I don't like the idea immediately, I'm like, so I am guilty of that. But that's what a negative workspace is. It's what you just said. It's like when you don't feel like you have a chance where your work will be heard, validated, appreciated, and examined for all it's worth.
Well, I appreciate you acknowledging your own role, because just to be clear, as we talk about this, it's not that we're perfect, because same thing with me, you know what I mean? Like I like to think that I'm magnanimous, and especially creatively sort of create space
Open-minded.
for that, but
What does
but
magnanimous
there
mean?
we
MAGA, make America great again. What?
like that's the only magnanimous I know. No, actually, one of the things that I'm proud of. So
You're
actually,
very
because I just
open-minded in terms of collaboration, I would feel. That's what I think is you're open-minded and able to hear.
well, I do believe that um um e- even if I have a strong opinion about something, that it's more important that we all feel like we can create something, than it is about, even if I fully think my idea is better. I'd rather us creatively be in a space that's like, let's, because then you have to give, you have to compromise, in my opinion.
Well,
you know
what I love about and this is I know this is kind of jumping a bit, but I think this is important because you know, this is something that I've learned from you that I've never really gotten from anybody else before in my life, I'll be honest with you. Um which is the most important thing in a collaboration is not even the artistic. For most people it's the art. What I think for most people it's their ego, but what they tell themselves is that, oh, it's about the project. Oh, it's nothing it's the
right,
project. It's about the
right.
project. It's about, oh, what's best for the project, or blah blah blah. But then again, who the fuck says, when you're working with people, it's like, so much of it comes down to just my opinion versus your opinion, especially when it comes to something subjective like creativity. But one thing you always say, and I've witnessed working with you on things, is seriously the most important thing to you when you enter any collaboration for any project is a good collaboration.
It's true.
That is a
It's true.
positive It's more important than what you said. My idea is better. Even if you don't think the idea is good, what's most important to you is that the collaborate. And frankly, look, here's the thing with that is like that. I'll be honest with you, that sort of chips out a little artist part of my heart, right? Which is like, no, it's about the work. It's about the work being as it's about, oh, it's about making sure. But listen, bitch, this is the problem with our politics right now. This is the problem with so many things, is that there is no
Right,
compromise because
right.
people do not value above, or at least top two, if not the top one. What's more important than even this project being good is that we are working well together. That is most
Well,
important.
thank you for underlining that point, because I mean, it is how, I mean, I'll give you a random example. So I'm working, because this is especially true when I'm directing. If Do I love all of what my designers have to say? Do I love it? Oh, my act. Oh, I want to go here, and sometimes actors just say shit just to regain control. But look, if I go, sure, try it, absolutely, okay, yeah, that's fine, then at least I'm creating an environment where they can make sure that they feel like they're equal collaborators. And in doing so, we're going to be able to problem solve down the road. And
Right.
I also, it's like, what battle do you really, are you going to really fight? What hill do you actually want to die on when it comes to collaboration?
And we'll get to this in terms of like why it holds up, because look, if you are disagreeing about fundamental things about the project, then yes, then that's not good. But if it's like, oh, should he say this, or should this happen, or should it be like this, or blah, blah, or it's like, oh, I want to cross here, or I want to whatever. Pick your, like you're saying, pick your battles.
Well,
And
you want to know because you want to know why this is actually an important topic. I'm thinking about. I won't say the name because I'll give you the premise because you'll know. Remember that show that I was working on for a long time, and you came in to help advise at some point as well, and you were
yes,
working with. Yeah, so that collaboration was like a decade for these writers, and it completely fell apart. And the reason why it fell apart is because they were not good collaborators for each other. They didn't know how to overcome so many issues out. So the art became, it didn't matter if the show was any good, which it wasn't that great. It's because they couldn't overcome the bullshit. You know what I mean?
but then here's the thing too, right? So here's what's interesting about that project. This was I'll say it was a musical that you were helping these people develop for a while, and then, like you said, I came on, and I was helping as well, and few really interesting opportunities, by the way, for these people. But honestly, this is a perfect example of we probably were not the right collaborators for that project. Why?
I agree. I agree.
Because I don't think that, because at a fundamental level, but they disagreed with fucking everything we said, or from
I
an
agree.
artistic standpoint.
Yep. Yep.
But
Yep. They did.
everything, but also there were foundational issues with that piece that they were not going to bend on, that I didn't agree with. And at the end of the day, like, if we're not there, like if we're not excited by the same thing with the piece, then that's problematic. And doesn't mean that means that we're not probably good collaborators for it. I'm not citing
Right.
moral judgments. I mean, for the piece, like if we're not excited by the, and I know I'm so sorry I'm jumping ahead, but that's a good way to tell if somebody is like not. It's like, are we excited by the same things? If you're really excited about the the gender questioning fluidity of the piece, and I'm really excited because I think it's about something completely different, then we may not be. Look, we can be excited by multiple things, but if we're not really excited by like the same core things about the piece, then
Well, you're not jumping ahead. You're talking about a bad collaborator, someone who essentially also potentially doesn't share the same vision as you, and that's a problem. Not that they have to have the same vision. It's not like, oh, they have to have exactly my vision. But to your point, if you aren't working on the same project, if you are working on a
exactly.
different movie or a different album or a different play or whatever it is, and you don't have the same vision, then it's probably not going to. Eventually
So right.
you could get past the first quarter of the collaboration, and then it's probably not going to get very far.
I'm thinking about one
Um,
project in particular that, had so much legs that we were getting some things for it. And I was working with somebody on it. And, it was a pilot, and we were getting, a lot of positive, but that's what stopped us at the end of the day, was that the concept we loved, but what we fundamentally thought the piece was trying to do and say, we were on different pages. And look, and it sucked because we loved working on it together, and we loved like certain things, but you can't, if you're working on different projects, like you're saying, if we're not united by the same sort of thing, then it doesn't matter even how hard we're working or how well we communicate. Like if
totally.
we're trying to make square pegs fit into round holes, then like that's not going to work.
Totally, totally, totally. And I think there's probably more, but I think that for us at least, the other one that we noted as what makes a bad collaborator, someone who's selfish and self-serving in the project. One could argue that's probably also a um, all part of elements of what we were just talking about, but someone who is really only looking out for themselves and is not looking out for the greater project or not looking out for their collaborators is probably not the best collaborator. Um, Now we're talking about this. We're kind of already sort of talking about this, but let's talk about why some of these pieces hurt a process overall. why they go against the creation of it. You had an interesting point here about how ultimately this holds up the process if they are a bad collaborator. Talk a little bit more about this.
Well, I just want to say one thing about just this section as we get into this. I'm reading your favorite book, The Actor and the Target, again.
Are you really?
Oh yeah, I'm reading it again.
So you do love it?
I adore it. I think it's the best book about. I
Oh.
think it's the best acting book ever written.
Okay, you crack me up. I mean, look. I don't mean that in a
Oh.
dismissive way. I appreciate the binary of the thought, and
Well, for me,
also
for me, it's no.
What do you love about it so much?
And by the way, I've been reading this way well before, but that's Jeremy Strong's. Do you think that's the best book on acting?
Listen, it very well could be. I mean, I actually think that book we read, Method, How the 20th Century Learned to Act. I don't know. I consider it an acting book as far as I'm concerned. I find it deeply fascinating, that book.
Well, reading it again, the reason why is because I think it's better. I think the reason it's rehab from regular acting training, because he says the exact opposite of what everybody else tells you about acting, basically.
Interesting, because if I may, it just felt like it feels like a deeper examination of point of view, for me than it. So I don't, and I just want to be clear, I don't really want to discredit the merit of the meat of the content. It's more a style thing for me, where it's hard for me to
stylistic.
consume.
Well, it's definitely musings. Although he does get, I don't know if you've read the full thing, but he does give you a lot of exercises throughout. But
yes,
it is a lot of musings. Yes, and there's but his whole idea, basically, just like the reason why I love it so much is because it really is the most egoless of all the books, because it's like. Because basically it's all about stop trying to get it right, stop trying to find the one. That's my favorite thing. He's like, there is no one way to do it, and that's something that I don't hear a lot. It's like, oh, what's this beat, what's this moment, what's this, what do I want, who am I? And his whole thing is like, that's dead. He's like, there is no such thing as a one. So whenever you're trying to find a one in anything, he's like, you're cutting out the energy, he says, which I agree with. That's just my experience. That maybe it liberates some people. To me, it's like, so he plays a lot with dichotomies and opposite, like I even love that he says, like, he talks about, and then I'll shut up about it, but he's like, oh, if somebody in a play is like, I am honorable and just, if they're saying that, it doesn't matter if like the character is Abraham Lincoln. If they're saying that, then there must be a part of them that is not honorable and not just. Because why else would they be saying that? Why else would anybody say that unless they're literally trying to suppress that part of them? Like, it's just like,
well, that's kind of what I mean by point of view. For what it's worth, he does a deep dive into not only point of view. That's a great example, but also point of view of not what you think, but actually how what your character's point of view is,
yes,
through the lens of the character, which I think, again, I do not mean to dismiss the content of the book, because I actually do think you're right. I think there's some really interesting stuff.
But one thing that I'm saying about this, about
what were you
why
saying?
I think it's useful about this section, is that sometimes it's hard to talk about what makes a good collaborator, and it's easier to talk about what a bad collaborator looks like, because it's just like he says, he's like, he doesn't try to describe good acting in the book. He tries to describe what block looks like, and he says, so this is how you know you're blocked. Anything that's not this, you're good. And that's kind of how I see this section. It's like, it's harder to describe, but because I've worked with some really great people who, like, artistically we were on the same page and like respect and a lot of things, but the projects didn't work out because of, and if I look at like what we're about to get, all of the reasons why we listed, it was a couple of these things. So it's helpful to go, as opposed to talk about what makes a good collaborator, it may be helpful to say like what's a bad collaborator and just recognize the warning signs of that. So
Right.
like I
Right.
say that because okay, the first thing, you're holding up a process. When you're working with somebody who's a bad collaborator, first, and by the way, I'm not talking about this is bad in terms of maybe they're disrespectful, they don't follow through, or it can be that they don't share, no moral judgment, they just don't share the vision, or they don't, have the same skills, whatever. It holds up a process. And by that I mean maybe the project could have moved along faster if you were doing it by yourself without this person, but because you're trying to work alongside and make sure and agree with every single thing on this person, you're trying to constantly reach agreement on things, like that can really hold up a process if you
Yeah.
are somebody who could take it by yourself and go with it.
Right.
So as opposed to trying to reach consensus all the time on every single thing, that's one piece. The other piece is that it can make you feel like you're moving forward when you're not. You could be meeting somebody every week, you could be writing with somebody every single week and really be putting in a lot of work with somebody and doing well, and you feel like the project's moving forward. But if you take a real macro view, you may realize like, oh, actually, no, we are not really moving forward. We're staying still, or we're not. But it gives you the illusion of safety, the illusion of like, oh, we're moving, we're doing things are happening, when they're really
Well,
not.
and just as interesting point you bring up, because when we were talking about how intimate these relationships are, part of what's tricky in this process is then when you finally realize, oh, this isn't going well, the breakup can be hard.
Yeah.
It can be hard even if it's silent, meaning even if because sometimes they just come to fizzle out. Sometimes it has to be formal. Sometimes it has to be really confrontational, and it's hard. It's hard to end those because, to your point about making it feel like it's moving along, it's because you want to believe that it's moving along, as opposed to sometimes looking at the truth, which is this just isn't it. It's not happening.
Right. Right. Exactly.
And actually kind of goes back. So then, why, how is poor communication and follow through detrimental to a process?
Well, I think
many ways.
I think how it's detriment, obviously it holds you up. And I think, and by the way, I think it also can hurt if your partner is not following through and there's other people involved. So if you have if you guys are, let's say you're writing a script together and a producer is waiting for a draft, and it's like or your partner said they were going to do this, so it makes you look bad by association. That's a big thing. So if somebody is a poor communicator, not following through, invariably you will have to bring more people on to a project, actors, directors, writers, whatever, financiers. If your partner does not follow through, that hurts the project's credibility.
I'm going to give you an example. of this, because this is a really good point. And in fact, this point that you just made really messed up a relationship of mine, because there was a project I was
working. The name.
It's because right at the end we had some opportunities to bring in some other collaborators. One of which was my manager, and there was interest in really people moving the project along. And right after we took a bunch of meetings, this person was like, "I'm not interested in doing this anymore." And look, it wasn't like it was 6 months after. It was days after. And really why it pissed me off, per your point, is I had to go back after putting in some calls to make some favors, to take us seriously and go, oh, never mind. It's not moving forward anymore. And it just made me look really shitty. And I was really pissed about it. It's one thing if you fuck with me. It's another thing if you fuck with people that I my own other relationships and my own credibility. I really take that personally. So I appreciate
and the credibility of the project, right? So like if let's say it was just that person, let's say as opposed to that person quitting, that person like just said they were gonna get certain things out at a certain time, like to those people or whatever, and those people, and they didn't do that, then and you guys, that hurts the project. But really,
Absolutely.
here's what I think is the most dangerous thing about it is that it can make you working with listen, you are who you spend your time with. It is fucking true. It's fucking true. And if you are, working with people who are not reliable, who do not follow through, who do a lot of talking and do not make or do not push things forward, then that will rub off on you. Will become complacent. That's
Yes.
just, you will become unreliable because that'll be
Yes.
especially when you communicate with because that's the pattern you fall into. That with that person, you won't be as communicative with them, you won't be as accountable with them, you won't build as much momentum with them, and then invariably that's going to affect all of your other collaborations as well. So it is really dangerous to work with people who are not reliable. It's not just like, oh, that's, again, I know you can sort of brush it off, especially if it's not like a project that's like a big priority. But like, take heed that like if you're working on a project, no matter how small, with people who are not super, like who are losers, for lack of putting it,
Yeah.
then you will probably take on some of those qualities. That's
Exactly.
just
No, well, yeah. I mean, that's an interesting point, one that we didn't even have in there. That goes back to the unequal talent thing. But how are you? How are you growing if you are working with people who are 3 steps behind you, be it in talent or any other things that we're talking about? There's you just sort of it's a lateral, if not backwards, move. The other thing that makes it, poor communication and follow through detrimental is not only that, to your good point about um, how it reflects on you, but it quite literally will fuck the process. I promise you. If you are in a situation where you have poor communication and there's general poor follow through on the project, it will the likelihood of it coming together it will likely not happen. It is too hard. It's too hard. I don't care if it is a one night cabaret or a feature film. There's too many things working against us, that for us not to have our best foot forward, it'll either be a hell of a process that you barely pull off, or it won't happen if the communication and follow through is piss poor on
and
either
if you're
side.
and this next point, which is if you're working with somebody who is negative,
Right.
whether
Right.
that's, how does that, okay, so listen, there are some people who are just naturally a little more cynical or naturally a little bit more maybe skeptical about dreaming big for the project, or
Sure.
this is a big problem.
Quote unquote realists.
Well, this is a big problem with some collaborations I've had, is that you try to dream big for, listen, excuse me, it's the most important thing is to do things. That's the most important. Generation is the single most important thing. Everything, all the work, I really come to believe all of the business work is supplemental to, at the end of the day, like, you need to go. You need to make go. This is our conversation with Eclay. Make go, and then, good strategy, good business sense is a way you shape as you go. But you need to be going. That's the most important thing, is you need to be going. So look,
And can I tack on to that for 2 seconds? You have to
sure.
go and to your point about Eclay too, and fail. That's the point about not being afraid of other creative ideas. Let the idea be wrong. Let it be the wrong idea.
Right.
But try things out, fail, and so that then you can go, okay, we did that, we learned from it, and then keep going. But without failure, you have very little room to actually grow and develop and
Right.
and learn.
Well, because what I was gonna say is that, like, okay, like, with when you dream big for a project, right? So you dream big for and you're like, I want this project to reach to this heights, or I want to see if we can get to this person. And then there might be other people who, which is good. They're like, at the end of the day, it's like, let's go and let's do it. But that they try to taper expectations on the project. That is damaging. It's damaging when you're working with people who are overly practicality and over real, practicality, and, like, by the way, realism and just being kind of a negative person, those don't go hand in hand. So
Yeah,
when you're working with people who are overly like, oh, let's not assume, I don't think we'll be able to do that, I don't think we can get that, I don't think we can raise that amount of money, I don't think we can get that person, like, work with people who, like, it is important, because then you're limiting. And look, I'm not saying that at the end, like, the reason why I'm making this caveat is because, yes, if you're letting those things keep you from actually making, that's a problem. If you're letting the ideal version of all of these things keep you from making, then that's a problem. But if you have people who are trying to squash the full potential of what something can be before you even try, which is something
totally.
I've experienced, that's not good either, because you're not stretching yourself as you're going. You're not. So that can really, so you're really putting a taper on the project's potential and its reach when you're working with a negative mindset. And obviously you're hurting your morale if you're not looking, if you have to, if every time you step into a room to work with somebody and it feels like you're stepping into, like, the arena, because you don't know, because you're gonna have to, like, or like, you're like, it's like this, you're like a suicide hotline where it's like you have to, like, you
Well, it's funny.
lift your collaborator up constantly, then, like, that's a waste of your time.
It's funny, one of the reasons why, and I know I really don't mind saying this publicly because I think there was a lot of factors and not one thing at play, but the revival of Les Mis was such a negative. Anybody will tell you who worked on that it was a negative building. And creatively, when you don't feel comfortable, again, to make choices, to be bold, to engage. I remember one time I during the when I was on for, I don't know what track I was on. The Revolution is when Gavroche gets shot. Right, he gets shot in at the top of the barricade, and I remember, like, I was particularly emotionally connected that day. This all relates, I promise. And I came off stage, and one of the other actors was like, right after the little boy got shot, it was like, "Are you good? Like, why are you crying? Like, what's going on?" Now, again, there's a lot of singers out there, but I remember, like, you almost feel embarrassed to engage. And I'm not saying that whole experience was that, but I'm using it as an example because it was such a negative environment that creativity could not flourish. It could not
Right.
do what it needs to do. So when you are building a project, and if you spot negativity in your collaborators, again, how is it going to make you feel to put out ideas when you're working with people who will squash them immediately? Um,
Right.
um, Going back to this lack of shared vision as an element of, if you and your, which, by the way, again, might not be the collaborators problem, quote unquote, but if you do not have a shared vision with your collaborator, that could make them a bad collaborator. And this is an interesting point you wrote down here, that then you could potentially be compromising on a project that could hurt it, not help it, by way of the fact that if all of a sudden you're compromising because you're not on a shared vision, then does the final creative product actually suffer because you just weren't on the same page?
This is when you have to trust your gut, sometimes, to an extent. And it's like, this is where, look, if you believe, you and I were working on, I don't mind sharing this. You and I and somebody else were working on a television series. And I think
Mm-hmm.
a big problem with that, why at the end of the day, that I think I think there were a lot of issues in terms of, it was a good, by the way, nothing bad happened. It was just like,
Yeah,
didn't, I think it was because we were all fundamentally on
different
different
pages.
pages about what the show
Agreed.
was.
Agreed.
And you can't, you can't compromise on that. It's like, that's difficult to compromise on that. And it's like, and I
Or
say
you
this
can,
because,
but then you need to make sure you're on the same page instead of being like, we'll find the vision. Well, maybe not.
but then here's the thing, right? I guess what this point is trying to make, though, and I don't know, it's like, but if you're, look, if this is when, like, you have to have sort of delusional confidence, if you think taking that compromise can really potentially hurt, and I don't think that's the case in this particular instance, but it could really hurt what makes the project special. because somebody
Yeah.
else, because maybe let's take that musical that you and I worked on. From their perspective, those compromises, and this is where you have to have that delusional confidence, like, no, if I do, these people, they're going to hurt my project because they don't get it, they don't see what's special about it, and that we're not on the same page. And if from their perspective, they maybe they were right, to not, because maybe, so it's like, this is when you have to sort of ask, like, okay, is a compromise worth it? Because yeah, sometimes you take a compromise and you kill what makes the thing unique. Take like
I
fucking
totally agree.
what's that show, the show Michaela Cole wrote? That's like a good example. It's like, or whatever,
I will
Netflix
destroy
didn't
you.
want,
I may destroy you.
didn't they want her to make some different artistic choices? And she's like, well, it does.
Yes.
What's the point? If I make those compromises, then it's not that
Yes.
show. It's not that show. So it's like,
Right. 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 Exactly. Exactly. No, it's funny. I remember Dominique Moiseau in rehearsal for Ain't Too Proud. Sometimes there'd be some questions, whether it's dialogue or something. Obviously, she wrote the script, so a lot of mainly dialogue, but it could be circumstantial, or would they say that? And she really stuck by her guns. And to me, I think the book is what makes that show really
book is
soar. Just
great,
the
I
story
think.
itself, and it
Yeah.
was. Yeah, I think it's fabulous, and it was interesting to just watch her, and always respectfully. She was never. It was never even really. She just stood by stood her ground, and then but also was a fabulous collaborator. If I asked her, like, I would ask for clarification of points, and it's sort of just like knowing. Again, it's kind of that point we were talking about earlier. It's like what battles do you choose to pick? Um, the final one that we have here, again, that we were talking about in terms of what's detrimental to a process, is working with a collaborator who is self-serving and or selfish. There's a couple interesting points here. If they're only keeping their interests and not the project or yours in mind, it can breed resentment on your end, right? You could be with that, and then of course, take me for example. If I want to keep that positive space, that I might not feel comfortable to say that, but all of a sudden I'm becoming quite resentful because it feels like this person is being totally self-serving and not keeping the project or my own feelings in mind. And I think you wrote this down, and I really love this. I mean, don't love it, but it can make you feel like you're working alone. And no matter what aspect of this industry we're in, theater, film, television, doesn't matter. If it's a collaborative art form, by it doesn't, even if it's a one person project, even one person show, it takes a village. These things are tricky, and if
And
you feel
look,
like you're working alone, you're not gonna want to
well,
jump in.
that's the
Yeah,
thing, right? And look, I know we make a lot of judgments, like, oh, like, don't just work with your friends all the time or whatever. It's like, be a smarter business person, expand your horizons, try and work with people who might take your career to the next level. But it does have to be said that, like, working, it is very hard. Well, work with those people who are ultimately you're going to have fun working with. If it's all
absolutely,
career driven, and if it's all just like,
absolutely.
who's going to, I feel like sometimes people go too much in the opposite direction when they work with people they feel completely safe with, as opposed to stretching. But, I say for myself, like, yeah, oh, I want to get that fancy director on it, or I want to get that fancy, or I want to get that fancy. And it's like, at the end of the
Yes,
day, if you talk to most successful artists, when they talk about collaborators, what they say is work with the people, work with good people. That's what, and good
yes.
people that's the most important thing. It's to find good people to work with. So, don't just be distracted by the shiny objects all the time. Like, just,
No. I think that's a really good point. You can be strategic and find other partners, but really, you want to be in an environment with people that you trust, which is why relationship building, again, that's nothing new. I won't say who it is, but there's someone that I know who's up for um, an artistic director position at a theater, pretty well known theater, and they said to me the other day, offhand, because they're up for it, they haven't locked it in. They're like, I just want to do it because I just want to give jobs to all my friends. I
Right.
just clocked it because I don't judge that. That's the way of the world. And if you don't think that producers and directors on every level, I mean, look at Flowers of the Killer Moon. You think you think that whole cast just no, what do you mean? That's like his regulars. Those are like people he knows and loves. I mean,
Mm.
that's the way that it works. Um okay, let's talk about how to navigate just working with bad
Yeah,
collaborators so we
and
can give
let's
some
leave it with that.
solutions here.
I think we should talk about that and then call it, because I think the
Isn't that
last
it?
point of, well, no,
Oh,
it's how
oh.
do you
Oh yeah,
know
yeah,
if
yeah,
you're
yeah.
that person?
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah. So you this is number one opinion. I think this is just the most important. We keep coming back to it. But communication, communication, communication. And by the way, this doesn't mean I want to talk about the one big piece of this here that's um if you are in the middle of a process with a bad collaborator, I think that you should you should talk to them about what's not working.
100%.
I
Yeah.
mean, you and I have talked about this, talking about some of the collaborations that we even mentioned that we've been in with various people, like us being able to communicate about what is not working to help us even understand if it is solvable. And so that to that point about resentment, hopefully there's a way out. Hopefully there's a way where the person might see the other side of things and might be willing to make some adjustments. So if you're working with bad collaborators, being able to communicate about what might not be working so much for you to see if there's a meet in the middle is really important, is really important.
Right. Yeah, I think that, look, you have to, I think it's always worthwhile to give somebody the option or the opportunity, you can't, what's passive aggressive to just, not like the way somebody's doing things, to not like their behavior, not like their workflow, whatever, and then just fucking ghost them. That's fucked
Sure.
up, and that happens a lot, and so it's like, everybody you are entering that very intimate relationship with, I think, deserves an opportunity to deserves an opportunity, and they and yeah, they don't think that you should just go somebody. So yeah, bring it up to them. Here's what I don't think is working. What are your, and look, it's hard, especially if you're not confrontational, if you're not somebody, it can be hard to do that, but it's essential. I think
Of
that
course.
workflow wise, so let's say somebody, you don't like the way that, you're working with somebody, you can say, hey, here's what I'd like to commit to change about our workflow and why. So if you're working with somebody who's not following through, who's not really holding up their end of the bargain, be specific. I'm not saying, come at them with like their inventory, don't take inventory on them, but say, hey, think it out. Here is what is not working for me. Here's why I don't think this is, and try and see your side of the street too. I have not been able to, I have, maybe I've given you, maybe I'm over pro- assuming too much on you. Maybe we're not taking this incrementally enough. Try and also see your side of the street. Maybe I've set an expectation more so that I am going to pick up the slack. That is my fault or whatever. So
Well,
so say,
the other
yeah,
thing, the other thing here is I actually what I love about your point about workflow in communication with collaborators is talking about how you're going to get this done.
right.
How are we going to get this done? Because and the reason why this one's kind of personal for me, and I would argue is kind of actually you'll relate to this. I can the creative is I always often say that the creative is the easy part.
Yeah.
I say it because and you heard me say that before. That's the easy part. Even if there's going to be lots of challenges along the way. Well, I believe in my own abilities and I believe usually in my other partner's abilities that we can problem solve, we can get through that. What's going to be hard is figuring out besides the creative what's it going to take to get this done? Is what relationships what's how much do we have to work on it? What's our timeline? And for me, if I need to communicate my expectations for workflow sometimes, because I think sometimes people can be a bit surprised or taken aback by my own sort of, and you've experienced this, you've seen me with other people experience this.
And it's important, therefore, and like I said, I don't think, like, one thing I disagree about what I wrote here. I don't think you present a plan. I think the worst thing you could probably do is say, like, here's how I would like to work through this thing, and here's how I think we can get it done. Here's why I
Mm,
think that's bad. I think that's bad because, again, you are feeding the perpetual problem, which is you are the one who's carrying the weight. You are the
sure.
one who is steering the ship, as opposed to saying, here are, like, here's what I would like to see. I have some ideas, certain ideas about, but I want to collaborate together on a realistic workflow process for
Yes,
us to get this done. Don't just impose it on somebody, which is something that,
that's right. That's right.
and then commit to it. And then whatever it is, do it, and then from a vision standpoint, I think that if you feel like you guys are missing each other in terms of the artistic merit of the project, ask them first. What excites you most about the project? What
Mm,
excites you most about the project? Like, really truthfully, ask that question. And you cannot ask that question enough. I think it's something worth asking regularly to make sure that you guys are staying on the same page. Also, what do you want to happen? What are the most important things you want to take away from this process? Yes, career-wise, but also artistically. What do you, it's like, well, I just want to get, if it's just like, I just want to get it up. I just want to get it up and I want to be able to, okay, good. But understand what they value most and what they want to see out of the process. And then clearly communicate what you would like to see from the process, and see if those things are tenable. And if they're not tenable, then that might be a problem. You might have to call it
yeah. Well,
quits.
it's funny, this, all of this, I would just say, this goes back to the point about vision, at the beginning of the project. These are the questions that should also be, you could probably avoid some pitfalls by having some of this conversation early in the process before you even begin. What are we trying to accomplish here? This is how to navigate avoiding creating a bad collaborator situation. I also just want to say, this is tough, but to know when it's done, to know when it's done, to know when the project you're working on might not have any more legs. And this is always, it's like a breakup.
It's tough because
So
sometimes a project can take 10 years. You could circle
yes,
back to that. Could
yes,
be what the collaboration is. It may not be a front of mind thing for either of you,
right,
but you guys come back to it every couple of months or whatever, and that doesn't mean it's
right.
so I guess the question, so again, I don't know if it's a symptom thing. And by that, so I don't know what to say, like, oh, it's like, oh, if you guys don't talk about it for a year, then it's done. Like, I don't know if that's true, because there are
Yeah,
plenty of projects that take decades to, because the other people have other whatever. I think it has, you have to look at a motive. And I think it's like, number one, I think it comes back to this. Does the project still excite you? Do we share the same vision for the project? Right? And agreeing and coming to a consensus on how much work we are both willing to put in. And if we're both willing to, it's like this, if it's something that we both can't really commit to, actually, that's probably better. It probably means that the project's still alive. It's like, I still want to do this. It's just not a high priority for me now. The project's not dead.
exactly,
You guys are sharing a
exactly.
consensus. You guys are actually on the same page.
Sure,
So I think it's about,
sure,
like,
sure.
it's about examining, making sure you guys call it quits when, if you guys don't have the same vision for the project, if you guys are still not excited by the project, and you guys are in disagreement about the amount of what the work will look like to make it happen, and there's fundamental disagreements about that, then I think that's it.
You also, this is ideally avoidable, but you could potentially replace them. There's a couple things I'm working on right now where I don't know if it's the best fit, and so I'm trying to figure out how to navigate what that would mean exactly. But if you have to
Creative
replace
Risk
them
Podcast.
and the project, and you have to replace them. You can let them know. So I'm going to use this opportunity to say to you that I think this is the end of the I'm just kidding. The last point though that I just want to say
Well,
that
this
that
is
is always
hard.
that maybe we should do a whole episode on just this, and probably have an entertainment layer on, because it's creative projects are always fun. Ooh, what about? Ooh, I had this idea. Oh, that's gonna be so much fun. But then who owns it? What's the legal agreement? What's the split? What
Right.
what are the
Because if
the
somebody
brass
takes that,
tacks?
because look, here's what's crazy, right? If you're working on it with somebody and it's not working together, and that person's not going to take it and do anything on their own, and you take the project and you make something happen, what is that other person owed? Are they owed an
Exactly.
explanation? Are they owed, like, I think that, it's different. It's different. I think it depends, right? If it's something
Well,
that you two truly develop together. I mean, it's just like, but this is something you need to consider. Like, you don't want to fucking burn somebody or break or frankly do something unethical. You don't want to do something unethical, like, and take
uh,
somebody else's IP that you guys worked on together and like close them out of the process because the collaboration isn't working. Like, that's not right either. And so it's hard.
there's a project still to this day. It's probably now, no joke, nearly 15 years old, maybe more. That was essentially taken, um um to be 100%, like a project that I helped it to develop,
What
that
is
was
it?
then
Just tell me what it
taken.
is. I'll censor it out.
That
The one
I
that's
was
currently
working
coming
on.
up? No.
No, 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 no. This was it, but just so you know, I spoke with her. We had our blessing
Interesting.
to do her, and it was this guy. And next thing I know, it was being developed without me, and I was shocked. And
Wait, so
still to this
the
day,
guy took it and
yeah. Uh-huh. And I all of a sudden I saw a press release for it being developed in New York, and I could not believe it. And we've never talked about it, and I still know this person, and it's been a point of contention for nearly 15 years, because if not more, because we weren't clear on. And so I take responsibility. Actually, this is good. It's like therapy. I take responsibility for my own inadequate communication about. And we were young, so it was, who the hell knew what was going on, and we were all
yeah, you were
doing
only 40
all
15
kinds of
years
crazy
ago.
things. Exactly.
All right.
Anyway, so take it from the best collaborators in the biz, LABOD and myself. No, but what's helpful about this too is it's all this is self-reflection, because I want
Yeah,
to be
big
the
time.
best collaborator I can be,
Right.
and I know you want that as well, and I know we want that from other people. So
Yeah.
we hope this has been helpful in
I got to
consideration
do a
of.
collaboration with my toilet, so let's wrap it up.
Always, this can't be every single episode where you talk about this at the end. Like, what? I mean, this. Okay. Anyway, okay. Here's our comfort food performance. What?
No, nothing.
Oh, you
Okay.
don't have one?
Comfort food
You gotta go.
performance. Let's go.
Well, don't
What's
we?
yours? You go first. Yes. What's
Okay,
yours?
but
Go first.
we can't end every episode with you having to the bathroom. Okay, so the comfort food performance is mine is a bit basic, but it's just because I rewatched it the other day, and I just think it's such an amazing film, and I just think he's so amazing. Is Daniel Day-Lewis in There Will Be Blood? I just think, he's just. Well, I
Wow.
watched it again. I just think he's so remarkable.
Very
and
straight
so...
cis, very straight cis white abuser. Very straight cis white.
I love Daniel Day-Lewis in that movie. What's yours?
What's my comfort food performance? It's hard to say. Hard to say. I feel like, well, so okay. Carolina, when my girlfriend was here at my parents, and Nicholas, we watched Pocahontas. Nicholas wanted to watch Pocahontas. So we were watching Pocahontas, and it got me thinking about Mel Gibson. Mel Gibson's in that movie, and Mel Gibson is John Smith, and Mel Gibson, by the way, sings all his own tracks. And
I don't really remember.
And it's Easter, so then it brought me to I was just thinking about Mel, and so a comfort food performance of mine, Mel Gibson. I would have to say. I mean, look, Braveheart. Braveheart's pretty fucking amazing. Have you ever seen Braveheart?
I have. I tried to watch Waterworld the other day and I couldn't get into it.
Well, that's completely different. Completely different white guy. Okay, but Braveheart, that movie is, first off, just an amazing ass movie. Mel Gibson is an incredible director. We were also talking about, because it's Easter, we were talking about Passion of the Christ. So I was talking about with my mom, and I remember seeing Passion of the Christ in the movie theater with my mom when I was a kid. And dude, have you ever seen that movie?
I've not seen that movie, actually. I've not seen
it's an amazing movie. It's like a fucking brilliant movie. The direction of that movie, it's incredible. Understand whatever, Mel Gibson's like a anti.
I should see it. I should see it. Topically, it's not that interesting to me, but I should see it.
You should see it. It's a phenomenal movie, and it's Mel Gibson as a director is a fucking amazing director. But
are you just saying Mel Gibson in general?
Mel Gibson, comfort food. That's my comfort food. No, Braveheart. Him in Braveheart, because he wrote. I can't believe he starred and directed that fucking thing. He's incredible in that. Mel Gibson, Braveheart.
Okay, I'll watch that.
Well, watch Passion. Watch Passion of the Christ.
I'll watch. Okay, great. I will. Thank you, folks, for tuning in to Creative Risk, where we talk about art, entrepreneurialism, Mel Gibson, and everything in between. If you enjoyed the podcast, please
you should add him to
like
the t-shirt.
And subscribe. In his Christ outfit. You should check out our merch actually on our website. But you can get a discount if you choose to be a Patreon member. We just have our full most recent episode that's for Patreon members only, how to start a theater company. So if you're interested, it is a good episode. So if you're interested in that, you have to become a Patreon member. But you'll also hear your weekly gays, your weekly get at it's. Mike, make sure to upload yours for today.
Right,
so you can check out our Patreon, patreon.com/Creative Risk Podcast. And we'll see you soon.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.